Comparison is not always bad, but it can sometimes be toxic, and it can especially be toxic on our spiritual journeys. Theodore Roosevelt once said that comparison is the thief of joy, and if anything is going to steal your joy, it's not worth it. If you're interested in hearing more about this topic, stay tuned. I'm Angela with Entrusted with a Journey, so let's really get into this topic. So it's cool when we're trying to compare groceries, right? That's totally fine. We want to find the best price for our money. But when it comes to comparing our personal lives with the life of someone else, it can truly be toxic and damaging. What it can do is create feelings of insecurity and feelings of disappointment when honestly, there's really nothing wrong with your current situation. We have to remember that what God is planning to use for our good, Satan will always turn that so that it can be used for evil. And so we have to be extremely careful and watchful so that we don't fall into this same trap of comparison. Here are a few examples from the Bible of how people compared each other and how toxic it was for that particular relationship. So Cain and Abel are brothers, and they both give an offering. Abel's offering is found to be more favorable in God's sight. Cain finds out about this and he gets upset. Long story short, Cain ends up murdering Abel. This is what comparison does in our heart. I won't really get into this, but there's the story of Jacob and Esau, Leah and Rachel, Saul and David, Sarah and Hagar, and even the disciples are arguing about who is the greatest. There are so many examples of comparison and what that actually. So one way that comparison can be toxic in our lives is through comparing ourselves to what we see on social media, right? So we click the app and it opens, and the first thing we see is someone else's success. What happens in us is we just see a single snapshot, right? And then we think that we're missing out on something, or there's something wrong with us, or why did they get blessed and I didn't get blessed? And that is how our minds work, right? And so this can be incredibly toxic. It's a snapshot of somebody else's life, right? And most of the time, pictures on social media are posed and planned. No one puts their awful moments on social media. Social media is like, hey, look at me. This is a celebration of what I've done. That's great. Or, that's not all the way true, because sometimes you can see somebody's like weight loss journey, right? This is me at my heaviest. This is me now and I look awesome. Sometimes it's like that, but most often it's not. It's literally like somebody's big moment and they take a picture, whether it's planned or not, of their success. That's okay. What's not okay is what we can understand about ourselves from looking at someone else's picture or watching someone else's video. I know for myself, and this is not even like a big deal, but I know I can do this. And so I've got, we at this age with little kids, you throw birthday parties, right? So I have a friend who threw the most, or what I perceive to be the most amazing birthday party for her little girl. They had the cutest little tea party set up. Not just any tea party, a princess party tea party. So everyone has on their beautiful dresses and gloves and all the princesses everywhere, big beautiful flowers. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am never going to be able to afford anything like that for my daughter. Like, that is like, it looks like it costs a lot, and also it is super cute. So instead of just being happy for, my little girl's birthday, I'm over here thinking about myself and thinking about how I'm like failing as a mother, right? Like, that is extreme. And it doesn't really match the situation. And so this is how social media can be extremely toxic. The other side of that is I don't even know if that little girl had the best time at her birthday, or was it like the worst event ever, right? Like I didn't even see her smiling in the pictures, but in my mind, what I assumed it was amazing. I don't know what it took for her mom to plan that party. It could have been a whole headache. Do I want a headache because of a birthday party? No. But in my mind, when I saw the picture, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing. And then it was just a whole spiral for me from that moment on, right? So social media can do that to us sometimes. We don't see the journey. All we see is that moment of success that we wish we had. And then we start to feel insecure, disappointed, and all of these other negative emotions that really are not worth your time. You're going to want to keep watching because we've got more ways that comparison can just be extremely toxic in our lives. You know, like I'm sitting here thinking of all of my examples and I'm like, why am I like this? Like, really, why am I like this? Even with what I know, I can still fall into this toxic trap of comparison. Like, why? I don't understand. Like, I really don't understand why I do this. I don't know. Another way that we can compare ourselves to each other in a way that's not good, right? That's actually toxic, is through comparing what somebody else has or whatever status or role they've achieved. So we've all heard of keeping up with the Joneses, right? And so I feel like this type of comparison lends itself to that because it's all based off of someone else's gain in material or their achievement in success, and we compare ourselves to that, right? So someone's home they just bought, right? Someone's the kind of car they have, the kind of clothes they wear, marital status, and right, like we can compare in that way. Some sort of academic achievement, right? Like where you went to school, things like that. All of this stuff, what it can do to us is it creates low self-esteem, right? So because we look at that thing and we see, or that material, and we see that it's valuable, we by default start to think that we have less value because we don't have that thing. So whatever that is, whether it's a home or whether it's a car or how someone dresses, don't mind, my kids are screaming out in the background as usual. So we're going to keep going. But whatever that thing, that material thing or that role is, because we don't have that, we look at ourselves as less than, when really that's not true. This type of comparison can be so toxic. Truly. I can remember being a single woman and looking at all of my friends around me. They all started dating at the same time. I was like, well, okay, look like I'm never going to get married. I'm going to just, I'm going to be however many years old without a husband. And yeah, well, good for y'all. I mean, but that's not really why I wasn't thinking good for y'all. I was thinking like, why me? So then I eventually started dating, and then I looked around and it was like all my friends that started dating, now they're all engaged and I'm not engaged. And I'm like, okay, so what is taking this man so long? Right? Like, I'm doing the right thing. I'm acting right. Like, where's my ring? Okay. I am trying to get a ring here. And so then like, it made me look at myself and think like, okay, so what's wrong with me that I'm not engaged yet? And then we finally get engaged and we get married and things are fine. I wasted so much time comparing. Instead of celebrating and instead of enjoying my relationship, I spent a lot of time like in my journal crying and praying like, God, what's going on? And I'm sure God is up there like, girl, I'm working on you and I'm also working on him. Like, let's get it together now. Let's like chill out because this is not that, right? Like what you think you want in other people and what you see may not be it. Anyway, I've got so many examples of this though, like truly. Like we don't have a house yet. And so in this stage of my life, I'm like, okay, why don't we have a house? We should have a house. Everybody else my age, they have a house. What's wrong with me that we don't have a house? There's nothing wrong with me. And so I'm only sharing this stuff with you guys because I want you to see, like, this is how my mind works. And this is something that I'm constantly working on, because it can make you look at yourself differently, and you devalue yourself when truly you have no idea what God has planned in the future. And who says that you have to be at X, Y, and Z milestone at a certain time? What God has for you is yours. When he has it for you, it's yours at that moment. And so, the comparing is what is the comparing, and the comparing in a way that devalues you is not okay. So this last way that we can compare, I personally think, is the most damaging in our spiritual walks. Like truly, truly damaging. This last way is where I believe Satan has deceived us to a point where we lose hope in God. So we can compare our now current season to a past season or a future season of life and think that that is better than where we are now. Hear me out, right? So we can look back at our lives and say, oh, it was so much better then, right? So it's no longer I'm comparing myself with someone else, but now it's I'm comparing myself currently with myself in the past, or who I'm hoping to be in the future. And we lose the now, right? Like we lose this present moment because we're so caught up in what we thought was better in the past and in what we think will be better in the future. Hear me out, okay? So I do believe that when we're looking at like our past selves or our future self, we can get some inspiration, right? Like we're growing, we're evolving, or we can hope for something greater in the future. It becomes toxic though when we think my best days are behind me. Or when we think things like, have y'all ever heard of like the glory days, right? Like it was better then, and so by default it means it's not better now. That is so not true. It's not. God is growing us into the women and to the men, if men are watching, that we are supposed to be, that he wants us to be. Yeah, some of that stuff is true. Like, some of the thoughts that I've had were like, man, I had more time to sleep before I was married with kids. Man, it was easier to get in and out of a grocery store before I had my babies, right? It's true. It really was. That doesn't mean that life is still not good now. That doesn't mean that God is not still using me now, that my life doesn't have purpose now. Yeah, and so I think the other side of that is, I think some moments in our journeys, it can be very challenging, right? And so it's easier to look back on the past and remember the good, but I think sometimes we get like amnesia, like, yeah, there was some hard stuff then too. I think sometimes we may forget just because life right now is challenging. So we can compare ourselves to what we see on social media. We can compare ourselves to someone else, what they've achieved and what they have as far as material possessions. And then we can also compare ourselves to our past self or the hope for our future self, right? And so we've got to be very, very careful as we compare. Like I mentioned earlier, comparison is not always bad. When it motivates, when it inspires, when there is good, when we hope, right? So those are all good ways that comparison can take place in our lives. But we have to be very, very careful that we are not allowing the subtle work of the devil to really take hold of our hearts, right? We've got to be careful when we start to think about ourselves like, I'm not good enough, or God can't work in my life anymore, or we just really need to be careful when we start to believe anything other than what God's word says about us, right? What we're really doing when we're comparing is that we are attaching our worth to things that really don't satisfy. We start to attach our self-worth to insecure foundations. So we've really got to work hard to identify these insecure foundations that we have secured our identity to. So in my next video, I'll talk about how to identify these insecure foundations that we've attached our worth to, and then how do we overcome these insecurities that we've developed as we've compared ourselves to. Comparison really does change how we view ourselves, and we have to remember what God says about us is true. I hope this helps. Until next time. Bye.